What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? Have you priced out the American dream lately? It's a nightmare.
It sure is.
I'm glad you were Johnny on the spot with that one.
Yeah, I really came in strong. That's for sure. No, we're starting a series just about living in America, American dream. Partially to do with the hyperinflation that we've been experiencing over the last year, somewhat due to a number of factors, including greed, supply chain issues, and just good old supply and demand effects of
Late stage capitalism.
Yes. So all those and more we're going to discuss further on. Today, however, we are going to talk about wages, food prices, transportation, car prices, kids, retirements. We got a number of topics, just kind of going over, what does it take to like actually do some of the normal things, like not even going into the whole housing or education aspects, which we're certainly going to do, but just like how the fuck do you even get by anymore?
Yeah.
We're going to dig into it.
And like your wages versus your parents and your grandparents' wages, when they're telling you, I just picked up an extra hour at the mill and fucking
or I just walked
bought
into
a 47,000 square foot house and a Mercedes Benz. If I could do it, anybody can do it. Bullshit. It's
one income, bagging groceries, working 40 hours a week, buying a car and a home.
Yeah, it's a different world we're living in, and obviously we've been gaslit the fuck out of growing up, especially millennials. At least Gen Z, they're as fucked as we were, if not worse. But they knew it the whole time. Where we're like, no, you just haven't achieved the American dream because you're a lazy piece of shit, and all of you born after 1980 are lazy pieces of shit. Every single one of you. That's why.
It's the lazy gene, actually.
It is.
You haven't heard of it. This is the first time anybody's ever talking about it. It's the lazy gene.
It was a mutation that just happened right around 1980.
1979, December. Well, I don't know what happened, but
like a nuclear experiment. Everybody was bitten by a radioactive sloth.
Once they took the lead out, they're like, "Oh, you're too smart, and now you don't have lead poisoning, so you're fucking weird."
It's the lack of lead poisoning makes us lazy.
Exactly.
All right. So you hear it all the time. Wages are stagnant. And things cost a lot more. And wages being stagnant isn't exactly true. And people who will try to undercut this argument are going to be like, wages are up. They're almost 20% more than they were in 1980. And that's true. Wages have gone up. Obviously, nobody's really living off of $10,000 or $20,000 a year or whatever the fuck they were making back then. But 17.5% is the average of what wages have gone up since before Reagan ruined the world. Productivity has gone up 62%.
Right. You could say a little bit more than 17%.
A tad bit more than 17%. And now, to put that into perspective, like, I don't know how to put that into perspective. Like, there's nothing I can see. If you you get twice as much free at the grocery store, like, that's what the capitalist system is getting out of us at this point, except it's 3 times as much.
It's like buy 2, get 1, except you're buying 1 and there's like somebody else is getting 2 for free.
Right. So our corporate overlords have been making 3 times as much from our productivity, and some of this has to do with the fact that the world's become more efficient. We've got computers and better machines and things like that. But it also is like millennials work harder than any generation, living generation before them. We're not going to go back to pre-depression era, but
I mean, you don't even really want to go back that discuss those, because even if you did, like, you look at the actual number of hours, like it's some studies say that people worked less.
Oh, before the electric light was invented and air conditioning, we worked a lot less. I mean, you think about it. Um, and
It-
so,
So like with wages, it's a little
mhm,
bit weird too. I mean, this whole thing is weird. So we
yeah,
were talking about this last night, even and researching for this kind of series and a couple of these
fucking
episodes.
hard, guys. You need to appreciate the work we put into this.
Well, you don't have to. Like,
I mean,
fuck us.
yeah.
But like, it's like it honestly does require like a full ass economics degree to like
Hmm.
understand like the intricacies of like how everything is decipherable and how to
Right.
make it decipherable, because as financial institutions tend to do these days,
Hmm.
they make shit fucking complicated, needlessly so, in
Hmm.
order to create barriers so that not everybody can just do the thing, and so that they can hide some of the like shady shit they do. And so it makes it very
Well,
difficult to sift through like the plethora of information out there.
yeah, it's so inflate. Everybody is like inflation adjusted is a term that we're all pretty familiar with, right?
Sure. Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and it's really easy to do inflation comparisons on like a specific item, right? Like a
Yeah.
specific item that we've always existed and we've always bought. Like, the gallon of milk is usually the go-to on
Right.
this sort of thing. And you get
Or
like, what did a gallon of milk cost
right.
then?
Yeah.
What does it cost now? What was your average wage back then versus what is it now? That's inflation. But where it starts to get complicated is when new technologies are introduced into the market that didn't exist before that become an integral part of life, right? So, like going back 100 and some years, you had the introduction of the car. Now, a car is a
Mhm.
whole new list of expenses, but it became a necessity of life.
Yep.
And so it's hard to figure out inflation comparative to the people in the 1930s versus the 1890s, because in the 1890s nobody had cars, and in the 1930s a lot of people started having cars. So that's where it starts to get complicated. The other thing where it starts to get complicated is when people have to start paying for shit that they didn't have to pay for before, which could also be like a car. In our case, in a little bit more modern example, is the internet. Obviously, when you compare people in the 1950s and 60s to now, an internet bill is a monthly expense that nobody used to have. Cell phone payments, and things like that. But also things that they did have before that they just didn't have to pay for, like childcare, for example, when you had stay-at-home parents.
Right. When you
Um,
could live off of one household
mhm.
income.
Health insurance premiums. Companies just used to give you health insurance,
Right.
and healthcare didn't cost, um, you know, $1 million for you to have a baby or whatever the fuck that
Right.
costs. I don't know, but
Yeah.
student loans used to be really a non-existent thing, and even when they did exist, it wasn't very much money. And now this is debt that people carry through their entire lives that cost them, hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a month for 30, 40, 50 plus years. So that kind of stuff makes it really hard to calculate because there's no one to one. So maybe.
Right. When we talk
Mhm.
about another way you could look at it as like the amount of disposable income, or like the percentage of your income in order to purchase goods.
Yep.
And like that's a factor we talk about with like housing. It's like, well, it used to be like around like 3 times your housing in order to buy a car and a house, which should be like 3 times your annual salary. And now it's more like six
Seven,
times,
yeah.
7 times that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like there's a lot more costs involved, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of those two things. So that level is like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't.
Well,
It might be 6 times more expensive comparatively then,
mhm.
but it also probably is 6 times more. And that expense is also wrapped into a lot more
Mhm.
expenses that were never taken into account, in the 50s. So
I think two things that really kind of highlight how difficult it is to wrap your head around the true impact of inflation and buying power, is gas and groceries,
mm,
because these were things that I think both of us were surprised about when we were looking back and we're like, man, groceries are way more expensive than they used to be, and gasoline's way more expensive than it used to be. And while in real dollars, yeah, it's more expensive, but inflation adjusted dollars, gas is on par with what it was in the 70s and
70s.
80s.
Yeah.
It's gone up and down. We're not even in real dollars at the peak of what gas has
Right.
has been in the past, 10, 15 years. And same with groceries. Now, groceries after COVID have kind of taken on a life of their own, and that's hyperinflation in a very short period of time, which is almost a different topic altogether.
Right.
But
And shrinkflation we don't really discuss because how do you measure shrinkflation
right.
over those decades? Like nobody's tracking. Although one thing I noticed
Hmm.
like a couple years back, even before COVID,
Mhm.
was I don't know if you remember when you were a kid, when you used to get a bottle of pop, it used
Mhm.
to be like 22 ounces.
Yup.
And then like when I graduated high school, it's like, this is like 20 ounces now.
Mhm.
And then now it's like 19.5. And
Mhm.
then we're just getting smaller and smaller. And like that's the one thing that I can point to
Yup.
that I know that I've seen. And
Uh-huh.
obviously, you can look at stuff and actually see it, but it's like that's nobody's keeping track of that type of data.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the absolute the value of what you're getting versus the quantity or quality of what you're getting, where maybe the price isn't going up, but what you're getting is going down.
Right.
Uh, but the point I was getting at with like gas and groceries not being excessively overinflated, even though we kind of feel they are. Part of the reason we feel that way is because in the 1950s and 60s, they didn't have all of these other payments eating into their income. So these necessities, it didn't take as much out of your disposable income to buy those necessities, so they didn't have the impact on your day-to-day life like they do today.
Sure.
And that is something that's really hard to calculate into inflation.
Right.
From what I've seen, and why putting these numbers together is just so fucking hard.
Yeah, I mean, we almost need to do like a full thing with Kathy and bring her back on and to help her
Yeah,
explain
that's a
it
good
to
thing.
us, you know.
Would be a good thing to do. I agree.
But getting back to wages a little bit, I saw one thing that was interesting that said since 2001,
Mm-hmm.
wages have really only risen like 5%.
Yeah.
Um, but the cost of benefits that people get from their employers has
Mm-hmm.
risen by 23%. So like there's
Yep.
like an index, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like the total cost benefit in 2000 was like 87, and the
Mm-hmm.
wage proportion of that cost was 98. These are just, it's an index number, so it's not
Yep.
like a percentage.
Yeah.
So then now in 2000, I think it was 23 or 22 when this stat was ended.
Yep.
Now the total benefit cost for employers is at 107, while the wage portion is only increased to 105.
Mm-hmm.
So like the cost of employing people has increased dramatically since 2000, which is like, it's like, I'm not out there to be like bootlicking for anybody, but it does make things more expensive for everybody involved with that process.
Which is weird to me, because like, where the fuck is the cost coming from? Because like,
It's
I
coming
mean,
from like healthcare costs. There was like a whole list of things that were unrelated to just purely like
Mhm.
your wage.
because I mean, they're definitely not.
I think it's still mostly healthcare, to be honest.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, healthcare has gone absolutely through the roof, and that's their own goddamn fault. They're the ones who've like
Well,
pushed the.
the employers across America are not
Mhm.
determining healthcare policy for the United States. For the most part,
Right.
there are some employers, obviously, that are major players.
Mhm.
The Forbes 500 list that are help making those decisions and by
Mhm.
paying politicians to vote their way.
You know.
But like for the most part, especially like small businesses or just like
Mhm.
regular medium sized businesses, they're not like determining how much how much healthcare costs. There's the insurance companies that play a large role into that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't blame employers necessarily for that cost of that cost rising.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to swallow that pill
No,
on.
I feel ya. I feel ya. But getting back to a pill that you
Mhm.
might recognize, so the real average wage, that is basically after accounting for inflation, we've had the same amount of purchasing power for the last 40 years.
40.
40
Yeah.
years. So we have not had an increased ability to buy more goods
Mm-hmm.
in 40 years. And considering
Which is insane.
right, and especially considering shrinkflation is a real
Mhm.
thing, like that means that we have the same amount of power to buy less goods at the grocery store and just
Mhm.
like anywhere you go than ever before.
And I wish we would have put the numbers in here, because we didn't look up the 40 years prior and how much purchasing power had increased in those 40 years, did we?
Like the 40 years before the last 40
Yeah.
years.
So like
I
from
didn't really
1940 to 1980 or something like that, with the increase in purchasing power, because it was massive. I mean, like, it's on the magnitude of thousands of percent from probably 1940 to 1980, and then 1980 to now.
I know,
would
like
be,
the inflation-adjusted cost for everything is like hundreds and thousands of percentage based off like
right,
whatever
but
type of
purchasing
good.
power, like what somebody could purchase in 1940 versus what they could purchase in 1980, and then what they could purchase purchasing power wise in 1980 versus what we can purchase now. Like it's that and purchasing power increased exponentially through especially the 50s and 60s. And then and even into the 70s, and then today it was started mid 70s. It started to slide,
Sure.
and I wish I would have put the numbers down because now obviously I'm going off of memory. But
Which is not the greatest.
it's not, and that's why I'm not quoting any specific numbers.
I was just saying you're not your greatest strength.
Oh, that's also true. Also very true. It depends on what it is, you know.
No, that's true.
But then, yeah, the fact that now we have more stuff than ever that we need to purchase just for internet is a requirement of life today, where
Right.
it never used to be. But you cannot exist in the modern world, and work and apply for jobs.
Like
and
hell, you can hardly go to like concerts without
Mm-hmm.
a smartphone. Like they'll charge you to send you a physical ticket.
Right.
now.
So like we're required to buy more stuff, but we don't have more purchasing power to buy that stuff. And it's crazy to me too, that corporations have continued to push this kind of greedy hold on all of the money in circulation and not spread the wealth around, because when people lose purchasing power, they can't buy the shit that the rich people are trying to sell us to make more money. I mean, even Henry Ford, as evil as that man was, gave us the 5-day work week because he wanted
Right.
people to have time off to go buy his shit. Like, that was the whole point. You know, he didn't care. He wasn't trying to give his employees a better life.
Yeah.
He's just like, if they're always working, they don't have any time to go buy the shit that I'm selling to them.
Isn't
So-
it rough when you look at history and Henry Ford is like one of the guys you have to look at and be like, he actually kind of did a good thing.
Yeah, I know. And the man was fucking evil. Like, I don't
Right.
think people
He
realize, like,
supported the Nazi regime.
he was a straight up Nazi. He had a portrait of Hitler on his desk, and Hitler had a portrait of Henry Ford on his wall. Like, they were buddies.
Dude,
Buddies. And
They were
not
fucked
only
up.
that, Henry Ford built Hitler's factories and taught him, like, how to do production line shit for his war machine,
It doesn't surprise me.
and continued helping Hitler fight the war, like, until America was like, you have to stop supporting our enemies, or we're
Yeah.
gonna have a problem. Like, it was into like late 1940, early 1941. Like, after we declared war, we were fighting the Nazis, and
Right, we
Hen-
had to literally freeze assets
Mhm.
of corporations in the United States because they were still continuing
Yeah.
to support the
and
Nazis.
it wasn't just Henry
No,
Ford. I
obviously,
mean, there's
there's
lots of them out there.
tons.
GM did the same too, but
Yeah.
like Henry Ford really thought that Hitler had some good ideas. Like, he's like, you know what, this guy's on to something with them Jews, and
I mean, most of the stuff we talk about is post World War II,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a really interesting period between World War One and World War
oh
II.
my God, yeah.
Where politically speaking, there was so many,
Oh, it was
just a wild time for political discourse that
a wild time that's really been swept under the rug too.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. I mean, of course, history in the fucking U.S. school systems
bad enough
is
as it is.
absolutely
yeah.
terrible. What that actually speaks to the true history, other than like, hey, we
Yeah.
did some more things and like we are the good guys. Beyond that, we missed out on a
Yeah.
few things, and I would love to do a topic.
I would be totally down for doing a topic on that, but that is not today's topic.
No, it's
so,
not.
I think going back to the wages thing too, and
Yeah.
how we were talking about how wages have increased since 79 by 17.5%,
Right.
which is still pathetic. It's also worth noting that your wages
Right.
have not increased by
Yes.
17.5%.
17 would be nice.
It would be very nice.
But, you do not get that.
You're probably closer to the 3 to 5%, because everything's on a scale, and when you put something in an average, the rich people get to hide their obnoxious accumulations of wealth
Right.
in with your obnoxious lack of accumulation of wealth.
Yes.
And
the
so
median is good for some things.
Yeah.
Wealth is not
No.
one of them when it comes to like wages.
no, so of all those wages that have gone up, the top 10th percentile of earners have gotten a 16% increase. versus the bottom 10% have gotten a 3% increase. So you're probably in that 5 to 10 range in the middle class
certainly
world.
single digits. Like
Yeah.
over 40 years, right? We're talking about since 79. Yeah. So
Um, and that's and to be clear, the top 10th percentile is not like as high up there as you'd think.
no,
On the bottom of the top 10, like
right. Yeah. The bottom,
you know,
the bottom half of the top 10 is really not crazy. It's only when you start getting into that low single digit of the top 10 where you're like, this is the number where they shouldn't be there. Like, it doesn't make sense to have people that far up.
Yeah. Like the top 10%, if you're just inside the top 10%, you're upper middle class suburban.
A couple $100,000 a house, couple $100,000 a year on your household. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
But that's what it means to be like upper middle class, like upper class.
And that's the top 10%, which is, I mean, when you start thinking about that, means that everybody else is below that.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, the median freaking income per person in the United States is like $33,000. So like not per household, per person. So it's like this is pretty rough.
It is not great at the time.
And we'll leave you with one last final factoid about the wage or growth or lack thereof growth. Supposedly, according to the Economic Policy Institute, the minimum wage today would be over $22 an hour if it had tracked with productivity increases over that same 40 to 50 year period. So
yeah, I mean, well, that makes sense. So I mean, we're 3 times the productivity and 7 times 3, 725 times 3.
Exactly.
It's not real hard math to figure out.
And like they're like, oh, Bernie wanted 15 an hour minimum wage. It's like, that was good like 10 years before he said that. Yeah. But it was obviously a lot better than what we have, what we had and we still have. Like $50 minimum wage still seems kind of crazy to me. But I don't know. Like
there's obviously extremes to this argument. Unfortunately, we're in the bottom extreme at this point, and people want to over-adjust for the top extreme. And there's a happy medium somewhere in the middle. And honestly, I think
maybe
$25 an hour, I think would be in that medium. It's just crazy. But and so this was another one of those things, like if you look up inflation adjusted incomes for the minimum wage, like if you look at and again, I'm going off of memory, but back in 1980s when it was like $4 an hour or something like that, if you were to adjust it, it would only be $7 or $9 an hour, whatever. It's pretty on par with what we have currently.
Sure.
But you could still buy way more with that back then. So that inflation number is misleading a lot of the times.
Right. That's why this says with productivity increases. It's not just like purely based off inflation. It's like, well, how do we keep our economy tracking with what we actually produce?
Yep.
And that's, theoretically the actual what minimum wage should be. Like it's not just like, what's a wage that we think is purely, minimum, like we don't even have a standard for it really anymore.
No, we don't. I mean, there hasn't been a standard for it in a long time, and we haven't increased the federal minimum wage in a decade and a half. Right. I mean, it's been a long time. And that's what it should be tied to, one of two things. It should either be tied to cost of living or it should be tied to productivity. Right? I
mean, those are the two. They should be the two baselines. Like, I think we could argue either way which one's better, but like it has to be tied to one of those. Inflation is not enough.
No, and it's not even tied to that.
Right? Some states have it tied to that, but it's definitely not federally that way.
Well, and you look at like Social Security, which is supposed to be tied to inflation or cost of living, and even that is not keeping up with. And to put that into perspective too. With that disposable income, this was, I thought, a better metric to just really put that into perspective, is personal savings. Average personal savings in the 1970s was around 13%. So on average, most people had 13% of their annual income went into savings.
They also didn't have 401ks to have to dish their
that is true. and we'll get into the 401k thing here in a minute because there's some interesting stuff on that.
Yeah.
But today it's 4.5% is the average.
Yikes.
And
so a third, basically.
So that means, all things equal, that much more of your income is having to go to just day-to-day living expenses and can't be retained or saved. And I think that, we were trying to look for that one number that kind of gave the best picture. And to me, I think that is a really good number that really gives that picture, paints that picture the best.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stark thing, and it, certainly if you have less ability to pay for just less disposable income to save, then that's gonna make it tougher to live.
Yeah, that's very true.
We almost need just an index.
Well, they have it, the consumer price index.
Yeah, but that's not good enough.
I know it's not good enough.
Something better than that.
All right.
So, moving on to some costs here. We talked a little bit about wages. First one we wanted to talk about was food, groceries. So it's really big right now in that food prices have skyrocketed, and it's true. Prices have gone up, but unfortunately, it doesn't track the way that most things have tracked since the 50s and 60s. Food has actually gotten somehow cheaper adjusted for inflation since 1960. And Americans spend less of their total income on food.
I can probably venture a guess as to why on that.
Well, it's probably worse food.
I'll let you finish, but then
that's basically the point.
Okay. There's two big things that make food a really bad comparison for inflation.
I hate the milk and the bread comparison.
Right.
I feel like it doesn't.
It doesn't.
Do a good job.
So, first of all, food in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, farms were there was way more family farms, way more small farms.
Sure. So actual competition.
Actual competition, but food was more expensive to produce and process because the technology, we didn't have the food processing technology. It is a mechanized system at this point.
It's absolutely insane. You look at turkey slaughtering farms and just egg farms, the millions and millions of things that they're able to produce on a daily basis is mind-boggling.
So production capacity has skyrocketed. Yeah. And the other thing is that we subsidize the fuck out of agriculture.
That's true. Since the 30s and the 40s, we've really subsidized it a lot. Which some of it was certainly merited at the time. Oh,
absolutely, and it still is to an extent because the agricultural industry left to its own devices is not something a lot of food doesn't store very well, right?
No, of course.
Perishables, and so from year to year, if you have a bad production year, it's not like you can store a ton of that crop from previous years, right?
No. Yeah.
So if you want stability in prices, you have to overproduce all of the time. And then what would happen prior to us getting heavily involved? The agricultural industry is one of the most socialized industries we have in the country. And prior to the government getting involved, when it was a free market industry, is you'd have good years for agriculture and farms would pop up all over the place. Everybody would do it. Then they would flood the market. Prices would be less than what it cost to put the seed in the ground.
Sure.
A bunch of people would go bankrupt. Then you'd have not enough. And then the prices would go through the roof. And people would starve because they couldn't afford food. And then the whole cycle would start all over again. And you'd go through that. And then obviously you've got bad weather years where there's drought, there's hail, all of that. So the government controlling that, getting people to overproduce or underproduce certain agricultural products, stabilizes that. For us, it makes our food prices consistent, not too cheap, not too expensive, consistent. You always have all the stuff at the grocery store that you want. For example, a pound of burger unsubsidized would be $35. A pound of hamburger would be $35 at the grocery store. Which, by the way, if if you are a red-blooded American who loves, eating meat, unless you go out and shoot it yourself, that's the most socialist fucking thing you'll ever eat. Like that is
Right.
straight up. We are funding your meal. That's basically the same as using food stamps every time you buy meat.
That sounds right. Didn't like in during the Great Depression, like didn't George Wallace or Henry Wallace? Sorry,
Yeah, let's
keep
not go
messing
through that
up.
again.
Henry Wallace and FDR, like they literally like slaughtered like a ton of pigs to
Mhm.
like reduce the
Yep.
like pig or reduce the pig supply
Mhm.
and therefore increase the price of hogs. And then like the market stabilized a couple years after that.
Yep.
Like the federal government and just the government has been
Mhm.
so involved with food production since the Great
Yeah.
Depression.
I mean, well, you've heard about the cheese caves too.
cheese caves.
So the
Is this,
government.
is this Wisconsin we're talking about?
No. This is federal government.
Oh,
The government used to buy tons of surplus dairy products, mostly cheese, and then they would store them in caves. I think
Right.
in like Missouri or some shit.
the cheese tax. The cheese tax.
Anyway, the cheese caves still exist and they're still used. They're just used by private industry now to
Oh,
store their
sure.
product. The government doesn't do that anymore. But we've dumped, millions of pounds of corn into the Great Lakes,
Sure.
from overproduction years to keep the price floors in.
Yeah.
So that's how that works, and that's also why part of the reason why we have such shitty food. Is because it's like, okay, the stuff like they designed the food pyramid to get us to eat the shit that they were subsidizing, not because it was the best stuff
Right.
for you.
Yeah,
It's because this is
Eat
the
dairy
stuff.
and wheat.
This is the
Not
stuff that
really the best.
this is the stuff that they're producing. Then the companies lobbied to get, even to this day, the food pyramid,
Yeah.
the way that they do it, it's a little better. It is still not great
Oh,
because
man,
the
it's
lobby
terrible.
industry came in and they're like, no, we need to sell more of this shit. You need to tell people that
The
they
dairy industry is powerful as fuck. Like way too powerful, if you
Yeah.
ask me.
should. Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So,
So that's my theory as to why
Yeah.
food prices have remained relatively stable and actually gotten cheaper. Is it's not really cheaper. It's just we're paying for them through tax dollars. And B, it's become hyper centralized. It is a monopoly. There's no two ways around it. Our entire
every
food industry
aspect of the food industry.
is owned by like 3 corporations. Completely controlled by like 3 corporations. There's just no, but it's also highly efficient. Like we
True.
produce
True.
we produce enough food in the United States to feed 10 billion people. Like
Just in the United States. Like if the
Just-
world stopped producing food,
we could feed
10 more than there is
Uh-huh.
currently people in the world.
that's how much we produce. 90% of it goes to feed our food.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
So I mean, like we would have to change because nobody wants to eat field corn and soybeans, but like that's but that's why because we produce so much of that, why meat gets pushed and subsidized, and that's where a lot of that price comes from for that burger is all of the land that we need to use to grow food
Yeah.
to feed our food. It's insane.
Yeah, it is pretty insane. And one last point I'll leave you guys
Mm-hmm.
with this, with the food aspect. So in 2013, they found that the lowest income bracket spent around $3,600 annually on food,
Mm-hmm.
which accounted to a share of around 36% of their total income. So the bottom quintile, so
Yep.
like the bottom 20% of Americans.
Mm-hmm.
People in the highest 20% spent $11,000 annually on food, which only accounted for 8% of their earnings.
God damn.
Like, that's the kind of disparity that we're dealing with here. Like,
Mhm.
we talk about the richest country in the world,
Mhm.
and that stat alone shows there's a big fucking problem.
Yeah, that is massive. Massive.
It's incredible. It's massive. On to the next one. Because it's just going to keep on rolling. We're just going to keep the hits.
Just power through it.
Hits
Yeah,
are going to keep on coming.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do: buy a car.
Yeah, no shit. You guys, they're fucking cars. I love cars, but holy crap, I don't know. Maybe you just never got the bug, but
Yeah.
you guys got it.
I do. I love things with wheels and motors. And so I buy a lot of cars, but I also buy old junk. I've never bought a new car in my life.
Yeah. No, me neither.
I've never had a car payment. And this is a personal thing. Most people aren't like me and buy a car because they're scrolling on Marketplace or Craigslist and like, I need that, and then they go buy it. Then are like, why did I do that?
But also, most people don't have cash laying around where they can.
That is true. That is true.
But also, the cars that you're buying are not usually $30,000 cars on Marketplace.
But the reality is that owning a car, we were talking about this earlier, is a pretty integral part of life in America.
Yeah, I mean, America's like one of the most unfriendly for public transportation countries that's ever existed. We're the most reliant on cars than probably any other country that's ever existed.
Absolutely. And so factoring in a car basically being a necessity for most people in life, in 1978, a car costs on average, a new one, about $5,800. That inflation adjusted, which, we talked about how accurate that is, but that would roughly be $28,000 today.
Which would still be a somewhat decent car. There's not a ton of vehicles being sold brand new today that are under 28,000.
But that's the average, right? So that was the middle of the road. Yeah. That was not, that wasn't a Yugo, okay? If you remember. Do you remember what the Yugos were?
Never heard of it.
Oh, it was from Yugoslavia. That's why they were called Yugos. It was like a shitty Soviet Geo Metro. Like, they were just
Geo Metros are already shitty enough. Why'd you need to make it worse?
Because Russia. It's like
they had to try.
Yeah,
something.
At least the Geo Metro was built with Japanese parts. Was slightly better.
You could argue the Pinto was worse. So
the Pinto was worse, and honestly, the Geo Metro was a pretty baller car. Like,
it's interesting. They're still around today. You can still see them every once in a while.
They're fucking reliable as hell, and they got great gas mileage. I mean, you weren't pulling a ton of chicks with them or nothing. But
no, in the 70s, you didn't care that much about gas.
Well, yeah, the Geo Metro was also in the 90s.
Shown that the gas prices relative to inflation are pretty much the same as what they were,
but not disposable income.
Right, not disposable income. That's right.
So the average price today for a car is $48,000.
Yeah, that sounds more accurate. Cause think of it, like all the fucking SUVs and trucks that are out there being sold. I'm driving around my little Honda Civic, and I'm probably gonna be driving it for a couple more years. And like, I'm probably never gonna get an SUV. My wife likes the mini SUVs. She's
the crossovers.
Yeah,
things
she's
that
got like
have
a Ford
ruined
Escape.
the soul of automotive industry.
It's like, I don't know. She likes I've never quite gotten it, but like that's.
I just wish they would have kept the fucking minivan, because that's all a crossover is a less convenient minivan.
It's also less dopey looking.
You know what? I love minivans. Minivans are baller.
Hey, you buy one minivan, and I'll believe that statement.
I've owned like half a dozen minivans.
Since I've known you.
No, when Emily and I were dating, I was driving a minivan and didn't have any of the seats in the back, and she thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah, I bet that was interesting. Pretty fun times, I bet.
Yeah, I mean,
she's gonna get you for that one.
Yeah, but if she doesn't listen to this,
that's fair. So obviously, cars cost more today.
I mean, damn near double.
Right?
Close to double on average of what. Because I mean, if you were looking at like the low end, like you said, a $28,000 car today, you can still get that, but you're getting on the low end. And back in the 70s,
like the base model for a cheaper sedan, certainly.
Back in the 70s, you could get a car for under $2,000 if you were looking for
and I bet like that 5,800 that still gets you like a
probably would have gotten you like
a Mustang or something like that.
Well, it would have gotten you a full size family sedan, like a Chevy Impala or something along those lines. And even like when you started looking at the expensive cars back then, you were looking at $7,000 to $10,000.
Right.
You're looking at a Cadillac DeVille or something like that. You're starting off around $7,500 if memory serves. It wasn't outrageous,
Sure.
Granted, cars in the late 70s were the fucking most awful things on the planet, but
right. Besides the Mustang, even though the Mustang wasn't all that great.
Oh, the late 70s, I think that was the Mustang too, which is the second worst Mustang.
Okay, that's true. But
maybe the worst Mustang.
The first half of the 70s, pretty good years for Mustangs.
I'd say 71.
Yeah.
71 was the year that the automotive industry died.
Bye bye, American Pie. Drove my Chevy.
And insurance is something you need. Then obviously, and the cost of insurance on average was around $75 a month in 1980, which is again inflation adjusted. Take that with a grain of salt. $350 ish today.
That's yearly?
Annually, yeah. Sorry, not a month. Annually.
Still,
I think I don't remember what it was. I just put the numbers in here without. I assume
$350 a month still seems high. That's got to be.
It might be annually.
Got to be.
I don't know, but full coverage. If you're talking full coverage,
true.
So by comparison, whether it's monthly or annually, it's $565 today. So if you're talking,
you didn't find the stat for what that $565 is like a day today, like a month, or like a biannually or yearly.
Yeah, I just assumed it was monthly when I grabbed the numbers, and I don't.
Ooh, if somebody's paid $500 a month for car insurance, boy, oh boy.
But I mean, I don't know if you're thinking if you've got a $50,000-$60,000 car and you got to have full coverage on it. I'm having a feeling,
considering a $50,000 car is the average car. Okay.
I don't know. I don't pay dick for car insurance, but I run liability on shit that's 20 years old.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, right. And my Honda Civic does not pull in a huge insurance cost.
No.
And being over 30 now, it's pretty average.
So that might be annually though. I will give it. Either way, it's a little less than double.
If you like look at the pure numbers, it's a number like it costs more. Go figure.
Yeah. Which is the point that we're getting at here is it's more expensive to buy a car, it's more expensive to insure a car. Cost of ownership is actually down a little bit per like 15,000 miles.
Sure.
I didn't throw the numbers in here, but and that just goes to cars are, when they say they don't make cars like they used to, you say thank fucking God.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a few aspects that you could point to, be like, oh, I wish they'd still did that. But for the most part, cars are incredibly safer for one. But for two, like they're just
exponentially more reliable. I mean, 100,000 miles on a car in the 70s was, high miles, and today that's just getting broken, so to speak.
Right.
It's a different world, and fuel economy has increased, definitely not to the point it should have, but is better than it was. And
I just can't believe, like, you look at like Europe and then the United States and the fuel efficiency that they get there, when it's the same car company selling virtually the same car. Sometimes they sell slightly reduced power in their motors and their powertrain.
I mean,
but like for the most part, it's the same manufacturer. They could sell those cars here.
They could. Usually, so there's a couple things that prevent a lot of cars that are sold in foreign markets from being sold here in the States. EPA stuff is a huge one. What our emission standards are compared to even what they are in Europe, especially on diesel.
Right.
Which is where a lot of those big efficiency numbers come from, is big. And then size, and this is where they're not really identical cars, is like they got little tiny fucking golf carts they drive around in like Japan and Europe and shit.
I'll take one though.
I mean, I've got no problem with it. I'm just saying, like, most people around here think they need, an F-150 to drive to their suburban fucking dental office job.
Right.
And they're driving smart cars. And the problem is that those little cars don't generally meet American safety standards. That's why a lot of stuff is really difficult to import from overseas until it's 25 years old, and then you can import it as a collector's item. Fun fact. But that is one of the things that is in a way sometimes where regulation maybe goes, I don't want to say it goes too far, but it definitely puts some barriers into why we can't get certain vehicles here in the States that it's like they obviously can build these things to do this. Why don't we? That's why.
Got it. Well,
Um,
and sort of last point here on the car
mm-hmm,
topic is urban sprawl. We said before, like
mm-hmm,
America is heavily, heavily reliant on vehicles, cars specifically, and I guess you got the stat in here. It
mm-hmm.
says since 1970, the workforce has doubled their duration, their commute.
No. So the number of people in the
Oh,
workforce.
got
So
it.
like in 1970, there were 77 million people in the workforce. Today, there's 150 million. And in that same time, the number of public transit users has only gone up by 1 million people.
That seems like an absolutely bonker stat.
It's insane, right?
Like you're
And
saying, like 99% of people just got cars instead of finding like a
well,
bus
so
or a
not
train.
there wasn't 77 million people in 1970 using public transit either. So but it was like 9% of the population in 77
Uh-huh.
used public transit, and now we're down to like 4 or 5% of the population uses it.
Weird.
Um, so that increase, so we've lost percentage, and it's still up a total of about 1 million people total using
Got
public
it.
transit. But the problem is that the government treats land use development and transportation as two completely separate issues, and they're not. Like where people live and work is land development,
Right.
and how people get from where they live to where they work is transportation.
Through that land development policy.
and you need the infrastructure to do that, and
Yeah.
and they don't do that. So, as people spread out from city center to suburban areas, transportation wasn't really considered. And now there's some markets that have increased in public transit and in city center living, like New York City and LA and stuff like that.
Sure.
And so there is ways to do it where you can encourage people to live closer to city center or live within reasonable distance of public transit and make public transit easier and more accessible.
Yeah.
Us as a country and most cities and states have not focused on that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to a certain extent, I get where they were coming from in like the 50s when like they didn't have to worry about land use and just
Mhm.
like the amount of it
Yeah.
because America is pretty fucking big.
Mm-hmm.
But when you like only focus on like, well, where's the cheapest land versus like how's the most like smart way to
Efficient use of
plan
that. Mhm.
efficiently plan our cities, that's where I would like
And-
be like, yeah, you seriously dropped the ball.
And to give, and and I don't want to say credit where it's due, but devil's advocate, I guess. Obviously, like every other country in the world, pretty much does public transit better than the United States.
Yeah.
But
For first world country.
yeah, but all of those countries are a lot older than the United States, and
Sure.
a lot of those cities were built around the idea that everybody was walking every fucking place they had to go,
Yeah.
or at best on horse and carriage.
Mhm.
And then as technology advanced, it was trains.
Sure.
And so they started building rail infrastructure, where like they already had their cities set up when rail infrastructure started
They
coming along.
already had to plan that stuff around
Mhm.
existing like
and everything was
cities.
close together, little roads that were designed for walking and everything. So their cities were already built as walkable cities where everybody lived close to where they needed to be. Where we were building it as the Industrial Revolution was happening. Like we started
Right.
building all of our major metropolitan areas as that happened. And the ones that we weren't, like New York City, obviously still very packed together, still has a lot of public transit, is one of our older cities,
Right.
But that's part of it. The automotive industry did lobby a lot against public transportation for a long time
I
too.
can't believe that's a thing. I just unfathomable.
So
to me.
so there's multiple facets to it, but we built cities after the car was
We
invented.
built this city for cars. Fuck yeah.
Uh-huh.
Really on a musical train today.
You are.
Train.
Jesus
So
Christ.
onto our next topic. Having a kid.
Fuck them kids.
I've heard that people like to do that thing.
Yeah.
The thing that leads to having a kid, but also having a kid.
Yeah, I like the thing. I like the practicing, but I don't feel prepared enough
Yeah.
to do the.
And you're not alone. A lot of people in America don't feel prepared to that, mainly due to the financial stress that it would potentially cause them.
Mhm.
because it's really expensive to live in America right now
Yeah.
because of some of the things we've already talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But also because the price of healthcare has increased dramatically. And so, you've got a birthing process from, like prenatal to like giving
Mm-hmm.
birth to like post birth, like being in the hospital or dealing with any like post birth issues. Like an
Dude.
average like birth that goes fairly well
Mm-hmm.
would cost you somewhere in $3,000 to $8,000.
It's actually less than I expected.
Well, that's like
I
very
feel
little
like that's just the ambulance
complications.
ride,
Eh,
if you take an ambulance.
no, yeah, that does not cover the ambulance ride. Hopefully, you don't take an ambulance to the hospital if you're giving birth. Hopefully, if are able to plan a little bit better. But that's just like generally like if things go okay, and that 8,000 is really where you're at for like paying for like all the visits to the hospital pre birth, and then like if you have to stay an extra day or two, like that 8K is closer to what most people see. Which if you think about it, like $8,000, like that's a car payment. That's starting somewhat a good decent portion of a house payment. Like just to have a kid, you could be reducing your ability to just like own things that you need to exist, in a way that is inhibiting our
Well,
growth
that's just
rate in
having
America.
it. Them fucking things just get more expensive as time goes on.
Right, and that causes if you have health insurance. If you don't have health
Oh,
insurance,
that's without health insurance.
Well, that's with health insurance. Is that
Oh,
3 to
yeah. I
8,000?
mean, so
Yeah.
sorry, that is with health insurance. Okay.
Right. Without health insurance, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars.
Okay, that seems more
I should
realistic to me.
have prefaced that, but
yeah, it was like 3 to 8K doesn't really seem that bad.
no, right.
But yeah,
and
that's if you're
like
insured.
the upfront cost. That's your down payment of having the kid, and then you're just gonna pay some more, like childcare, pre-K childcare. If you have 2 kids, supposedly it can cost you around $2,000 a month.
So we're talking that for just like one kid.
Yeah, I mean, we're depending on where you live.
It also costs more, I think, for like young children. Like,
oh yeah, it certainly does. Like the younger you are, it's going to cost more per week, and so that's why a lot of like European countries they give you family paid leave when you have a kid, because instead of you having to pay for somebody to watch your infant, the government's going to pay you to produce a better income with you watching your own kid. Also, so there's not a scarcity of like people taking care of kids, because it takes a lot more caregivers to take care of infants on a ratio than it is for older. So it takes away the amount of caregivers that could be giving care to, the older age kids. So that's part of the reason why we have a shortage of daycares in America, and a high cost of that is that we have to give our infants up within weeks, within a month of having that kid. And so there's just not enough people that are willing to watch kids. And so the labor cost has gone up immensely through childcare. And that's not even including food, healthcare for the kid if they get sick, clothes, toys, like the fucking actual basics,
One of my old coworkers, back on the childcare thing just for a second, made me think of this, but one of my old coworkers, when I still had a real job, had a kid, and like, so going through the whole process, and he was just talking about like what they were gonna do, and he's like, we were stuck between one of us quitting our job, and taking care of the kid, or both of us continuing to work and putting them in daycare, because the cost of childcare was going to take one of our entire salary. So we would literally just be working for somebody to take care of our kid. And they decided to keep working because they didn't want the break in their resume and the loss of career advancement, which makes sense. But that's just insane.
It's
like
payments, all that stuff that counts towards your retirements.
Right. But it's just insane to be like, can you imagine getting up every day? And I'm like, I am getting up to go to work to pay somebody to take care of my kids so I can get up and go to work. Like, that's literally the only reason you're getting up and going to work.
Yeah.
It's just fucking asinine. Like,
It's it's absolutely bonkers. And that explains why the birth rate in the United States has become lower than replacement level, because it costs too fucking much to exist.
Yep.
Not only is it expensive to have a kid, it's expensive to just live in America. So apparently, just 17% of all working people in the United States have access to paid family leave through their employers. And if you're lower income, then that decreases even more so. So, like, the reason why Minnesota enacted paid family leave starting in 2026, which is kind of far away.
It is, but
whatever. But
at least they're doing it, you
yeah,
know?
no, right. They're joining like one of 11 states in the
Mhm.
whole country that are offering some sort of state paid family leave.
Mhm.
And part of that is to reduce the cost of childcare and to, think long term for
Mhm.
what's the best thing for our future. And the best thing is to have parents taking care of their kids
Yeah.
when it makes sense,
Mhm.
when it's the most costly to do so, when it's the most important to be there for your kid.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing we're going to say about kids. We're definitely going to get more into it when we talk about just sort of like the bigger picture of
Mhm.
living in America. But that's just like the highlights.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I don't know. You want those things. I
Yeah,
still don't
my wife and
understand
I are
why.
really looking into
Yeah,
it, and
they're-
it's like, yeah, it's really, really expensive. And
Mhm.
thankfully, we both have pretty decent jobs, but
Oh,
we're also like kind of debating, like, should we wait
Yeah.
until like 2026 to
Yeah, I
like
mean,
have the kid?
it would make
Like,
sense, you know?
um,
I don't know. I like getting drunk on a Tuesday, so kids aren't really in the picture for me, but
we're probably not going to ask you to be the godfather, but we'll keep you on the list.
uh, I mean,
Speaking of getting drunk on a Tuesday, sounds like a good thing to do once you're retired.
this is true. It's why I haven't had a real job in a long time, just because the retirement drunk on a Tuesday thing sounded good early, so I've tried to
Right.
stick with that lifestyle for as
Yeah.
long as possible.
I mean, like nobody wants to see a 70-year-old person in the workforce or running the country or, not retired. But
A 70-year-old, man, that would be fucking youngster running the country these days. My God, that whippersnapper would probably have all kinds of new, fresh ideas.
that would be insane if we could finally have a candidate that's under 70 running for the presidency that is mainstream. But c'est la vie.
Yep. Yeah. Obviously, retirement's gotten a lot harder. Partially because the silent generation and the greatest generation fucked way too much. And now
Right.
we've got all these boomers who won't die that we need to take care of, and we're not having enough children to replace them to pay their Social Security payments.
Well, yeah, technically they did have a lot of kids, i.e. the millennials, but Gen X hasn't had replacement level,
No.
and millennials certainly haven't up to this
Mhm.
point. So like something's going on.
Yep.
Wonder what it is.
But I mean, when people get old, we can either, push them off a cliff, or we need to figure out a way to take care of them, and it's gotten really, really expensive. Especially when you start talking about if their health starts failing and they need actual intense care, you can
Nursing
lose
homes or
everything. This is something that always just irks me, because when both my great grandmothers and my grandfather passed from Alzheimer's, and my grandmother did everything she could for all three of them to keep them at home as long as possible, till she just physically couldn't take care of their needs anymore. Which is just, I mean, it's a painful enough time to just watch somebody go through that in that
Right.
situation. And I was a lot younger when my great grandmothers had to go into a home and all that, but I was mid-20s when my grandfather passed. And first of all, like, when he did finally have to go into a home, and thankfully, like, from there to him passing away was only like 6 months, which is,
Right.
I say
Thankfully,
yeah,
right,
it
yeah.
was like he was gone long before that. But the line items, they had a line item there for cutting his food. Like, they quantified how much it costs for the people that are already there taking care of him, who they don't pay fucking shit to anyway,
Right. Yeah.
to cut his food. And it was so inhumane. And then the thing was that grandma had to sell. They couldn't have any assets, because anything that was an asset, the nursing home could come and then take if we couldn't afford. And then obviously the government comes in and takes over from there to make up the difference. But that's it. And people, if that happens and you still owe your home's gone. Your kids don't get anything. And it's absolutely insane for that end of life care, and then retirement.
Yeah.
Like saving enough money. Obviously, at 4.5% savings versus 13% savings back in the day, how do you get to that point where you can afford to retire? That's difficult. Social Security hasn't kept up with the cost of living, and pensions used to be a thing that existed.
I don't know that I've ever heard of that.
What is this pension thing you speak of? Is that French?
Yeah, it feels un-American.
It is very un-American. So for all of those who don't know, it used to be when you worked for a company, they would be like, if you work for us for a certain amount of time, we will pay you for the rest of your life so you can afford to die.
So, right, what they would actually do is they would make sure that they would put enough of their own profits aside and accumulate that in order to be able to pay for your retirement.
Yep.
So sort of what we have to do now on our own, companies used to help do.
Yep.
And now they don't.
So now you're probably more familiar with a 401k.
Right.
And it's funny, and I think we should do an episode just on retirement if I can talk Chris into talking his friend into this. But Chris has a friend named Bruce something. I'd have to look the text message up. Who helped write the bill for 401ks.
Is he a good friend or an evil friend?
So this is funny. This is his biggest regret. Like,
oh no.
And so he wrote this, and it was never intended to be a primary retirement fund.
Oh right.
It was designed to be a retention
for like corporate executives, right?
For corporate executives, like we'll give you your pension and this opportunity to also invest in the market where we'll match and give you. It was supposed to be retention for corporate executives. It was supplemental retirement plan for higher income earners. That's all it was supposed to do. And then companies saw that and they're like, wait, you mean we can just make the employees pay for their own fucking retirement and we don't have to? Bet. And then they just fucking and then they did that and they're like, yeah, no more pensions anymore.
Yeah, and I think they got once the stock market got bigger, companies started to realize, well, if we make people do 401ks, which invest purely in the stock market, then we'll just be inflating your own stock prices, and it's a win-win for us. So, like, they're like, we got to do this. Low cost, high reward.
Yeah.
Where can I sign up?
Exactly. And
the American people don't get that sign up.
No, we don't. And then the problem is, like, a lot of people, this happened during the recession where the market crashed, and so did their retirement funds, and then a lot of people couldn't retire. My former step-grandmother, she had that. She was really well off. Stock market crash. She's still working today. Like, she lost the majority of her retirement in it. And it's just, it's
not... the market never depreciates. It always appreciates 7% annually every single year over time.
Yep.
Don't even question it.
No, never. Just don't retire when it's not doing that.
Right. Exactly. Just don't happen to be that age where you have to retire when it doesn't do the best.
It's just like, why weren't you born 20 years earlier to buy a house? I mean, like, what the fuck were you thinking?
It's unbelievable. How could you be so dumb?
Poor planning is all it is. Like, take some fucking responsibility, my friend. Right. So retirement has become obviously a lot more expensive because now, again, going back to that disposable income, now you are responsible for putting money out of your paycheck into your retirement, where your company just used to take care of all of that for you.
And now they're saying, oh, you have to save like 10% of your paycheck. Are you kidding me? They didn't have to take 10% of their paycheck in the fucking 50s and 60s to put towards retirement, man. No. Like, that's insane. Like, if you would have told them that.
Yeah.
Like, but now it's an everyday thing, and it still, in most cases, isn't good enough.
Yep. And they're like, oh, and we'll match it by 5% maybe.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
It's...
But, I mean, we just... retirement, as many other things in this country that is broken, is something that we need to think about as, like...
He just had a fly land on his
glass. Cody, what kind of contraption you got going on here?
Fucking flies in February. What the hell?
We need to think about retirement as like a human necessity because nobody's expecting a 70-year-old to work full time at McDonald's.
Like, Nikki Haley.
She can suck. She can suck at being president. Um, that's ridiculous. Like nobody wants that for their grandparents, and it shouldn't be a thing. And this needs to be as a necessity as housing, food, and healthcare is retirement.
100%. So there, we told you a bunch of stuff you probably already knew and just made you angry more about it. But the reason we did that is because we wanted to talk about this topic. It came up with like a cost of living thing. This was actually I feel like this was a request. It was a request from somebody on TikTok to cover this. And then we're like, well, it's a really big topic for one episode.
So he wanted like just like the economic like well-being of like where we are today. It's like, well, that's a pretty convoluted topic.
So we're
breaking that down.
We're breaking it down into, unfortunately, I feel like it's slightly less hard-hitting, entertaining episodes, but we need to build to the overall the point that we're making.
We're drawing the lines before we paint in them because we're not artists enough to like paint it without the lines, but we're gonna eventually end up with the painting that you guys are gonna like. I think so.
Yeah, maybe. We hope. Otherwise, you'll be really disappointed.
Just throw it away, and in the worst case, you'll just have drink some wine while you're painting. While we're painting. So,
so we appreciate you sticking with it, and hopefully, I mean, if you feel like you're struggling, basically, if you take anything away from this, it's because you are. And even when people are like, oh yeah, wages have gone up and certain things haven't increased that bad with inflation, the amount of disposable income you have to just live and enjoy your day-to-day life, and the security you have, in your ability to retire and have children and, get cancer or whatever. Like all of that is not the same as what it used to be, and you do not have the disposable income to handle those life events. And so that sucks for you and for all of us. But you're not alone. You're not imagining it. That is 1,000% the world we live in.
That's right. We're all in this together in a certain way, and if we start working in solidarity, hopefully we can get some change.
All right, guys. Well, once again, thank you for listening. Follow me on Off the Wagon on all of the socials, at Off the Wagon, on all of the socials, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also follow Let Them Eat Toast on all of the socials as well. I'm pretty sure Addie has set them up. We haven't really pushed them, but they're there.
Facebook, mostly TikTok, and check out our podcast on YouTube for the visual people.
Yep, yeah. If you want to watch this and see my eyes, because I gave up trying to wear sunglasses while I did this, here's where you can see it on YouTube.
Wearing sunglasses inside is only cool for so long.
Yeah, it is. Eyes get strained when you're trying to read the computer through all this shit. You can buy merchandise and help support us.
That's right. Check out this fly-ass sticker down here.
Yeah, if you're watching this visually. If you can't,
we
have a logo. It's got some toast on it.
Go to the website and buy a sticker because I freaking love them.
And he designed it. Taylor even designed the sticker all by himself.
The little toast goat, little guy. I did that. Addie did the other ones.
Yep, Addie did the other ones. Taylor's wife designs the majority of our merch. If you like what we're doing here and want to support us, we really appreciate it when you buy merch, or just send us money if you're feeling generous. You can do that.
Yeah, we are this close to getting a Patreon up and running for you guys.
I know we've been saying that for like 6 months, but it'll get there eventually.
Yes, it will.
Otherwise, the link tree in the bio on all of my socials, you can find our Venmo and stuff there. We do try to put a lot of time and effort into doing this. So we appreciate you all. We love you. If you can't donate, we don't hate you for that. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate you interacting. Never hesitate to comment and tell us what you want to hear about, or just tell us what you're thinking, what your thoughts are. We love hearing from you guys, love interacting with you. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week on Let Them Eat Toast.
Have a good day.